Well, welcome. I always start off with how many folks have actually tried VR. You know, in the old days, it would be nobody. But I'm going to guess that a lot of people have. So is there anybody that's never put on a set of goggles? Really? Okay. Till yesterday. Okay. So you look at this little gal up here, and isn't that epitomize the why we're all here? It's our youth. It's that optimism, the ability to strive, to move forward. And yet we also have that feeling of technology, that feeling of innovation. And then if we look at the phrase above her, and it's so true, the power of virtual reality cannot be understood until it's experienced. So I always ask folks, have you ever experienced it? Because until you get in a set of goggles, you just don't get it. So who am I? My name is David Cleverdon, President and CTO of 360 Immersive. I've been in this industry for over 30 years, but this industry has changed significantly. From initially we were shooting film, we were shooting what people call video, and that movement through the years, which is over 30 years, has always been about innovation. In fact, we first started in the 80s with something new called video. Before it was all film. 1990, you had the internet. Well, who knew what the internet was? Some of you can even remember when there wasn't an internet, and some of you probably can't. I'm being optimistic there, but perhaps that's true. And then we had CD and DVDs, and they were all distribution methods, and it got better and better. In the 2000s, we had interactive presentations, both on the training side and the marketing side. Flash was a great authoring system. Started out with the web, but then it quickly evolved into be able to put out a presentation on CD-ROM. In fact, in 1994, we cut our first marketing piece for Hewlett-Packard based on Flash, and it was distributed to 120,000 CDs. 2010, we've now evolved to the point that online training, online marketing, everything is online. And then there's the app thing, And so it's all an evolution. And then we use 2015 because that's when the first available low-cost virtual reality headset was available. And that was actually the Gear VR in December of 2014, but I'll call it 2015. So all of these things are about pushing the envelope for not only our clients and the people that we serve, but technology in general. So quickly, I'll go through what our company is all about. We started out in 2001. We have strategic marketing and production. That's pretty much what we've been all about until 2014 and 2015 when we started the shift to immersive technology. There's two principals, myself and Jennifer Lostra. And effectively, the passion and the foundation of the company is all about creativity, innovation, and technology, and that's why we're talking today about virtual reality. 2015, that's when we started this journey. And our passion, frankly, the first project was for Boise State football. They've been a client since 2001. The coaches are always looking for something to differentiate themselves in the market. How do you apply and attract talent? And virtual reality, when a kid down in Texas may not understand anything about Boise, Idaho, besides blue turf and potatoes, how do you get them to engage? How do you get them excited? How do you get them to join the team? VR is a way to back then it was innovative, now just about all the teams are doing it. So once we started down that path, we started working with some of the quarterbacks, we started looking at, well, the ability to train, the ability to educate using this new technology can apply to law enforcement, fire, EMS, workplace safety, medical. And so the work that we've been doing up until this point has basically been focused around those areas. We're just now starting to look at the educational field as if it's good enough for our adult learners, it's good enough for our youth. And that's why we're committed to essentially engaging learners at all ages and all levels. This is our tagline, we build apps that save lives. We love that. And it's a passion. And that affects us more on the training side. We're not going to talk to our youth about if you don't learn this that you could be in danger. But if you think about the ability to learn something and impact people in a positive manner, it works as well as for a law enforcement officer as well as a 10-year-old. Innovation and education. So Benjamin Franklin has a great saying, we bring it up a lot, tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. But involve me and I learn. And if you think about your daily life, if you think about the ways that you learn and perform, it's so true that, if I give you a 3-inch thick 3-ring binder, tell you to learn something, your retention is going to be fairly low. In fact, for most of us, your retention is going to be probably less than 10%. But if I get you out in the field and I'm having you do something, I'm having you perform that act maybe over and over again, that processes or procedures, that's when we really learn, and yet that's expensive. So how do we use it? Well, the key to it is we use technology. We use technology to help us in a way that we haven't been able to do before. So we always step through virtual reality because it is a new technology. It's something that a lot of you may not know. You've probably all seen it, and maybe most of us have experienced it, but what actually is it? Well, essentially, it's possible to experience anything, anywhere, anytime. If you can dream it up, we could actually create it in a VR environment. So that type of immersive technology, it actually tricks the brain. When you're in a VR environment, and I had an example, we were doing a trenching app. And that trenching app is when you actually walk down in the trench. It's computer generated, and then we could actually show you here, but if you walk in the wrong place, it collapses on you and kills you. But I was actually in the app when we were developing it, and I turned around, and one of the cross pieces looked like it was going to hit me in a place that we probably wouldn't want to describe, especially on video. And I had a visceral, I literally felt that it was real. To me, it was real in that moment, and that made a real impression with me about how VR can affect a training environment and also an educational environment. Because to me, that was a real experience for that moment, even though we had been developing it and I looked at it, I was just in the right place at the right time to turn and go, oh. So that sensory experience is so real that even though it's an artificial environment, we interact with it. And I'll go back to Boise State and those quarterbacks. We'd put a set of goggles on and they'd be running plays virtually, and they would literally, with the goggles on, they'd go through the motion. To them, it felt real. It felt like they were there and they could do it over and over and over again. Or if they wanted to, they could assess it from a coaching standpoint. Why are you looking over here when you should be looking over here? So if you think about virtual reality, what does it sound like to you? Doesn't it sound a little bit still like science fiction? Virtual reality? It sounds like science fiction still to me. But if you think about it, we have been experiencing a form of alternative or virtual reality almost every day of our lives. And I'm going to take you back to our ancestors, great ancestors, sitting around a campfire telling stories from the elders to the youth, communicating that story, and these, depending on how far back you want to go, these kids are so engrossed with that story and they're living it through the experiences of their elders. How many of you have ever bought a great book, got so engrossed in a novel that you just couldn't put it down? We've all heard that experience. We've all felt it. That's a form of virtual reality. It's a form of alternative reality. Same with a movie or TV. You're looking at, you just love the plot. You love the script, and you can't believe it's over when it's over. These are all forms of an alternative reality that we put ourselves in, and the only thing different between that and virtual reality is we're using technology to fully encapsulate us. We're in the moment. We feel when we're in there differently than if I'm in a situation here. I'm looking and feeling versus Kip. You go by Kip? Yep. So, immersive technology, combination of hardware and software that blurs the line between physical and digital world. The content is deeply engaging. We're in the middle of it. We feel it, whether it's virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, or a new thing called XR, which I don't even know if they put a definition to it yet. And it's that simulation of 3D images or environments that we interact, and we can have sight, we can have sound, we can have touch. We can use haptic gloves or input devices. We can reach out and we can perform a medical procedure. We can do it, and we're going to feel like we're actually in the OR or in the emergency room. It's not quite real yet, but it's going to get better and better. So that the biggest thing now is sight and sound, but touch is going to be a component for us in the future more and more. So there's two types of VR in general terms. 360 video. I could set a camera up right in the middle of this room, and we could relive this moment as if I was standing right there. I could look all around. I could hear and see if Tom back there started yelling and screaming. I would turn and I would look, because that's my experience, and it could be today, streamed live to Facebook, or it could be a year from now, archived on some site and distributed through an app. The only difference between that and traditional video is that I can look all around. I can interact with it. I can turn. The only thing I can't do, and a limitation of 360 video, is I can't move through it. If the camera moves through it, I can move through it. But if the camera's here and I want to walk over and look at it from Tom's perspective, can't do it. Computer-generated imagery, CGI, I can move around. If it's programmed to let me move around, I can move around. I can interact with it. I can select things. I can pick things up. But it's not quite real. So each one, going back to the training aspect of it, each one of these has its own uses. For instance, law enforcement, they want to see their own uniforms, their own processes, procedures, tactics. They want to see real people doing real things, capture it, engage it, distribute it, and engage it again, and distribute it again. In some cases, like hazmat, it's dangerous. I talked about that trench collapse. Well, I wouldn't actually really want to collapse a trench on any one of you guys. But in this simulation that I can, and you'll learn from it. I can take and flip a tanker truck over. We're flipping a tanker truck over and breaching it, and you have noxious chemicals leaking out. You probably wouldn't do in real life. We can do it in CGI. We can have you walk around. If you walk over here too close to it, and maybe as the truck spun out of control, it knocked over a power pole. That live wire is down in the ditch. There's water in that ditch. You walk into it, and in one of these simulations, you die. So, in general, when you're talking about engaging learners, you're talking about two different types of technology that make up virtual reality. Now I'm going to step away from PowerPoint for just a second. We're going to talk about augmented reality. Augmented reality is essentially laying graphical elements or animation over the real world. So if I had for instance, we're doing a project for an oil and gas client that we have, and I can take his tool, which is designed to do their thing 3 or 4 miles underneath the ground. I can look through an iPad and it will spin up right here, and I can pull components off. I can watch the processes. I can walk around it just as if I was walking around Corey here. Badges are really great, you know, they let you get a personal touch to things. And that's a different technology, but it's still an immersive environment that allows you to interact with things in a way that you haven't been before. So there's benefits of VR. So how many of you have ever taken a field trip when you're in grade school? Anybody? Everybody, sure. And it was something you really look forward to, right? I mean, I did. We got to do it maybe once or twice a year. Because it's a real organizational problem. And even nowadays, there's a lot of liability involved that when I went to school that people hadn't even thought of. But imagine if you could offer learners the ability to extend beyond the classroom, not on a yearly basis, not on a bi-yearly, monthly, weekly, but how about on a daily basis as part of the normal curriculum? Imagine being able to take, and it's being done right now, and we'll get into that, but imagine being able to take your students, and I'm going to come over here and talk to Mark a little closer because he's yawning. Must be after lunch kind of thing. It is the time. What? It is the time. It is the time, absolutely. But think about it, being able to take students or learners or in a training environment and to be able to take them into a different place than the classroom. And I know you guys have all thought about it because that's what you do as teachers and educators. So we have now basically a curriculum about textbook and live instruction based, but imagine if you could take and make it experience based, not throwing away the textbooks and not throwing away the live lecture and education, but weaving in experience-based technology that makes the learning experience create a situation that they understand the things that they should do. If it's a student, to build up their knowledge base. So it's called micro-learning. So technology, let's face it, it's part of our youth DNA. I mean, some of you folks that are younger, you probably grew up with an iPad or iPhone or smartphone in your hand. My age, I mean, I'm not even sure that we had telephones, but that may be something else. So the idea is to make learning fun and experiential. Always a tough word for me. The other thing is that this type of content, to a certain extent, eliminates the language barrier because you're not sitting here and you're just talking to somebody, you're letting them experience that process or procedure or going through the Smithsonian or the Barrier Reef. I don't know if you've seen this or looked at it, but we all engage learning differently. Some of us learn better by watching, some of us learn better by doing, some of us learn better by reading, listening. But traditionally, they have different retention rates based on the type of technology. For instance, I mentioned that 3-inch thick 3-ring binder has a very low retention rate. If somebody were to sit up here and you'd listen to a podcast without any visual elements, that's a different retention rate. Now, if I throw visual elements, so it's a video, so there's a little bit more things going on, you're a little bit more engaged with it, suddenly your retention rate is maybe up to 30, maybe up to 40%. But it's when I start stepping into actually doing something. And I'm going to take Corey and we're going to put something together. We're going to build a robot right in front of him. He's going to remember how to do that far greater than if I were to give him that 3-inch thick 3-ring binder. So VR tends to fall into these categories because, remember, tricking your brain, you have a tendency to actually feel like you're doing something, like you're engaging something, like you're experiencing something. So if you think about it, the ability to have learners retain the information is exponentially higher than if, for instance, you just give them that 3-ring binder. And I know it's common sense to most of you, but sometimes it's worth talking about. So we have the power of VR, expand horizons in the classroom, virtual field trips. You know, imagine being able to take that field trip every day as part of your class. Go someplace different. Learn about, for instance, you take a Civil War dissertation on the Battle at Gettysburg. Well, how much more interested would you be as a kid in high school if you could actually go there, if you could look around, if you could feel it, versus just reading about it, maybe looking at some pictures, or maybe watch a 2D video. So that realistic learning response to virtual experiences gives you a better learning environment in the classroom. The other thing is that immersive technology is going to be part of our future. It will be part of our future more than we can probably guess at this moment. And just being engaged with it now from a student is going to do a better job when it comes to career path and understanding the technology than if they don't. The other thing that we have an app that is basically designed to help law enforcement understand schizophrenia. People suffering from the disorder, their reality is different. Their reality is different than what I'm experiencing and what Corey's experiencing and what Mark's experiencing. And if you understand that from a law enforcement officer standpoint, you have more of a tendency to build empathy when you have to engage somebody that's suffering from that particular disorder. Because they hear things, they see things that we don't see. They see bugs, they see kind of spectral elements, they see sparkles, they see things that for us would be extremely disoriented. In fact, the expression comes to mind, it would drive us crazy. Well, and yet when you're a law enforcement officer and somebody is obviously in a little in distress and they start getting aggressive, what is your response? Well, your response is to do what you've been trained to do. And yet, if you build empathy and if you can train in a way that maybe there's an alternative to that, and that's understanding their reality, and that's where VR really shines. So, walking in somebody else's shoes. You know, we have a very diverse society now, community. We have all kinds of people. We have to understand those cultures. And frankly, from a community and society standpoint, we'd be better off if we did. VR can help you understand a culture or a given point of view that you may not have the opportunity to understand without the technology. And if you think of watching a video, it's a passive experience. Mark's sitting there and he's about half asleep, but if I had this same presentation and where he's in the middle of it, he's going to be far more engaged. He's going to be awake and engaged versus just kind of sitting there as in a long PowerPoint presentation. So that ability to build empathy and understanding is sometimes part of virtual reality that is kind of not talked about a lot. And it's only because we tend to talk about games and entertainment, and that's really what's making all the headway nowadays. Training is coming on strong, but when you talk about building empathy, that's going to be a key component to what this technology can help with. Well, there is generally always challenges when you have a new technology. You know, people think about human interactions and connections. We're not talking about taking a pair of these goggles and that a kid in a classroom is going to live in them. We're literally talking about using a tool that, in micro-learning, live instruction, you know, PowerPoint up on the screen, that's still going to be a mainstay, but the ability to weave in experiences that have context and are basically matter to the particular form of curriculum that the teacher's trying to teach. And you're talking about 2 to 5 minutes. So there isn't really a human interaction problem unless you believe that you're going to sit in a set of goggles all day, and I'll tell you, that's not for me. I wouldn't do it. Lack of flexibility and good content. Actually, this is not true anymore. There's a lot of good, especially educational content, there's a lot of good content out there. We'll get into that when we talk about the Google Expedition. Functionality issues, when it breaks, what then? Well, we all have technology in the classroom. I mean, nowadays you have laptops and you have PCs and you have iPads and tablets. And when they break, you just figure it out and move on. From an educational standpoint, it's what you do. Technology will, I guarantee you, will break. It's part of what it does. Addiction to the virtual world. We all know that there is a problem with addiction to certain types of video games. Kids tend to virtually live in them sometimes. And when you take for instance, if you were to take a VR game that may not exist today, but may exist in the next year or two, that's so captivating, it could be a problem. But it's no more of a problem than what we see today when kids live on their game consoles, when they live on their PCs, and they don't get out anymore, and they're not playing baseball, they're playing with PlayStations. So, is it a problem? Absolutely. But it's not indicative of just virtual reality. Expense and budgeting. Technology always costs money in the classroom. There are ways that you can minimize that, but it always costs money. And output for various devices. Frankly, this is becoming less and less of a problem as it's becoming more cross-platform. By the way, this isn't just a monologue. If you guys want to throw something at me or have a question or anything like that, feel free. Because we're going to have a lot of time for question and answers. We're going to have some time to get you in the headsets and run around with some of the mobile ones. We'll talk about Google Expeditions. We'll talk about Paul Zimmerman here shortly. We'll get to that. So, what got us excited in the first quarter of 2015 was the fact that we could take a device that I could hold in my hand and I could pair with a mobile phone, and suddenly I had a recruiting tool. And suddenly I had a training tool. And now you can take a device that you can buy for a few dollars and cobble together a Wi-Fi network, and you've got a tool for the education, for the classroom. That's what got us excited, because I saw virtual reality in the early 90s, and it was expensive, it wasn't very good. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the only people that could afford it was the military and medical and the aviation industry. We've all heard about flight simulators, and they've been used for years and years. But when you take something I can pick up in my hand that any one of us can afford, mainly by the fact that the phone in our pocket is the main driving force, and we pair it with something that can be as inexpensive as one of these and suddenly have a tool for learning, that got us excited. So, 2 to 5 minute scenarios. We talked about micro-learning. We need an interface that is intuitive and easy to use. The mobile environment allows us to do that. We can share content across multiple locations. You can download any number of apps nowadays and go into a virtual environment. You can download Google Expeditions, and you have a training tool right on your phone, whether you have a goggle or not. You can do some fun things. You can, especially in a training environment, we can have you walk through a simulation, again talking about the trenching, and you can then make a choice. And that choice may walk you down into the trench and something bad happens, or make another choice and good things happen. And so you have the opportunity from alternative endings and decision trees to get people thinking, to get people engaged. And of course, once you create the content, you can output it for various hardware devices, whether it's iOS, Android, the Rift, or desktop. So there's, again, talking about the different ways of distributing. You have desktop, laptop, iPad, tablet, mobile devices. One of the easiest ways that if any of you want to experience, just go like this. It's not as immersive as a goggle, but it's certainly better than watching a passive experience with just a video on your phone. So mobile devices, HMD is really anything that you put on your head that kind of blocks out the world and allows you to experience that, including my phone. All-in-one devices, these came out about 4 months ago, and they will really revolutionize the classroom, because no longer do you have to take a bunch of refurbished iPhone 6s or Galaxy S6s and buy a bunch of goggles. And if you can budget it, you can do this, and these are sub $200. They're optimized for VR. They're driven by apps, and they're just, I mean, they actually, for classroom usage, if you can afford it, you can sprinkle this throughout the classroom, and you don't have to worry about keeping the phones mated with the goggles. Tethered head-mounted displays, that's what this is. The problem with these, you know, the experience is really nice, but I've got to have a PC to drive every one of them. So they work in some cases, especially if you're up in the front of the classroom like this. But if I wanted to give you an experience, each one of you, so you could have a system that you could use, and we're not going to form a queue all the way up and down the hall, then I'm going to probably go to a mobile device. So I made mention of how to implement a program in the classroom. And I'd like to, is anybody from Blaine County? By any chance? Okay. I just wanted to make sure if I got the facts wrong that, you know, nobody would throw anything at me. So it's not a lot of people. 20,000 residents, 8,000 households, per capita income's $32,000. So you can imagine a rural school district like this is pretty challenged for funds. And Paul Zimmerman is actually, he calls himself, or they titled him, he is the technology innovator for Blaine County School District. So what he did, and you can probably get an idea of the type of personality this guy is by, this is the headshot he sent me. He built a program on next to nothing, and we're going to step through that. So as I was interviewing him, he first experienced VR 3 or 4 years ago and immediately was hooked because he understood the value for the classroom. Google Expeditions is a program that actually he researched, and it has some real benefits, but it also has some real disadvantages. So like in everything in life, you want to be able to take the good and leave the things that don't quite fit behind. For instance, the software, which is free to download, has over 1,000 different educational experiences that any one of you could literally sit right here now and download them. Install the app and it would show up on your phone. The hardware they sell is $10,000 and not so good, because you can do it so less from a budgetary standpoint. What the software does do, going back to the software, is it tends to unify the group. I could pull it up here, and if each one of you had it installed on your phone that I could drive the experience from my phone. Okay? And it's that micro learning. You know, this is really not designed, again, as a replacement. It's not designed as suddenly we're all going to be in VR headsets all day long. So the other thing Paul brought up is, you know, you have to kind of look at curriculum, what makes sense. And the only reason I'm using this later, there's a lot of bullet points here. What makes sense for VR? Well, I can tell you this, if I wanted to show somebody how to use a speaker like this, that's not a VR application. If I wanted to give them the experience of walking through the Smithsonian, or if I wanted to give them an experience of crane safety, or going back to adult learners, or law enforcement and active shooter, whether civilian side or law enforcement side, absolutely a good use case for virtual reality. Augmented reality, however, I may pull up a headset and it'll walk me through every phase of taking this apart, because I can pull out an extended view of this, a different technology, but it's still immersive. So you got to pick whatever makes sense. It's not a magic bullet. It's whatever makes sense for your individual curriculum. So as I mentioned, the content's just getting better and more affordable, and if you engage Google Expedition, it's free. It costs you anything. So Paul brought up, I said, well, Paul, let's talk about virtual field trips. He says, well, you're thinking of something different, because I was talking about virtual reality field trips. He says, well, we do virtual field trips now. And it's literally a guy up here on the screen, and you have the class, and he's just engaging them via Skype or via Zoom or some other form of teleconference. And that's a virtual field trip. He said, yeah, okay. Definitions change, but I think you guys know what I mean. He also said, if somebody wanted to do it now and they've got a bunch of iPads in their classroom, they can do it without spending a dime. Download the software. Go around, have the kids go around like this, have a lot of fun with it, without spending a dime. But what did Paul do? Well, they don't have a lot of money, but what he did do is he reached out to the community. He asked people, he said, how many people have an old phone? Because we all have a tendency. Even Mark's awake now. Even Mark has probably an old phone in his desk or in his drawer someplace, or maybe not. But there's a lot of old phones that people buy phones every year or two, and they're just laying around. Well, if those phones are fairly current, within the last 4 or 5 years, they can work for these type of programs. In fact, what Paul did is he actually taught his kids to repair them. So people have a broken screen, they go get a new phone. Well, it's a perfectly good iPhone 6. Just got a broken screen. Well, let's replace the screen. And suddenly he's got something he can integrate into his classroom experience. So what do you do about VR goggles? I mentioned that you can buy some of these for $3 or $4, and these are a couple $100. Paul decided to use a goggle that kind of folds up and can take any size of phone, small or large. And it's called Smart VR, and I think they're about $30 or $35. The other thing he mentioned is that there's a lot of grants now for innovation, and I know everybody would say, well, grant writing is really tough, and you're right, but it is another way to go about it. The other thing that he mentioned is that you can just start small and scale. I talked to a couple folks during the trade show that they had started with like 2 or 3, 4 sets of goggles. Yeah, you got to pass them around, but at least you're getting in the game. And the one thing that, if he could be here, he would say that VR in the classroom is actually easier to implement than you might think. Just because it sounds like science fiction, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do it today. So I've got Paul's email there, and we'll get into Paul just a little bit more. But
my name is Lance Teasley. I'm in middle school in Eagle Grove, Iowa. Eagle Grove is not a very tall place. It's actually very flat. This is the tallest building on Main Street. It is about 50 feet tall. When I grew up, I want to be an architect and design skyscrapers. Yesterday at school, we went on a class trip, but this was not a normal trip with buses. This was something very different. The very first expedition we went on was to the Burj Khalifa.
Go ahead and grab 2 hands and put them up to your face.
It's so tall.
Okay, we're gonna go to the 153rd floor.
So those kids are engaged. I've got another one for you, by the way.
Welcome to this EdTech Teacher video tutorial on using Google Expeditions. So on the right hand side, I have the teacher device running Expeditions, acting as the guide. On the left hand side of the screen, I have a student device acting as the explorer who will be following the guide. So on the right hand side of the screen, you can see I've initiated a Mount Everest expedition. On the left hand side of the screen, on the same wireless network, so I can see the teacher's device and I'm following the lead teacher. So on the right hand side, you can see I'm in one scene right now at base camp of Mount Everest, and I can see some questions and ideas. And on the left hand side of the screen, on the student device, I'm kind of rotating the device and exploring base camp of Mount Everest. On the right hand side, you can see that there's questions and prompts, and I also have the ability to direct students towards a specific scene within this VR experience. And you'll notice on the left, the students get an arrow and then a set of crosshairs to point them to the right scene. We'll move to the next scene of the event and they rotate their device until they get to that scene as well. So the teacher can always have a sense of where the students are. And you'll notice on the right hand side of the screen, as I rotate, I'll see a little smiley face indicating where a student is looking in their VR experience. All the while the student gets the arrow indicating where they should be looking. Now, a nice feature in Google Expeditions is the ability to pause the expedition, maybe have the students put down the device, focus on a question, and then pick back up. So I've unpaused the expedition and the students are exploring again. Now on the right hand side of the screen on the teacher device, I'm scrolling to the next scene in the expedition, loading that scene, and on the left hand side of the screen on the student device, they're now experiencing the ice river scene of this Mount Everest expedition. And again, students can explore, rotate around, experience this scene in full 360-degree sphere immersive environment. So I'm pointing the students towards another specific aspect of this 360 sphere scene. And I can always get a sense of where the student is. And on the right-hand side, on the teacher device, I can open and close those discussion prompts ranging from beginner all the way to advanced, and I can rotate through and see the various scenes I might want students to explore. Again, simulated how I can scroll through various scenes and decide which ones I'd like to pick up with or which ones I'd like to skip when leading the expedition in the classroom. Notice at any time I can see how many explorers are connected and what wireless network we are using, and I can then decide as a teacher if I'd like to cancel the expedition, and then it immediately bumps the teacher out. So that's Google Expeditions. Thanks for watching this EdTech Teacher video tutorial.
So this is at a point, if you all are still awake, that we can do some question and answers. I also have Paul's slide deck, which follows this one, that I can actually step through it if you have interest, or we can just go on with our day. So any questions, any thoughts? Well, I seeded you into the audience, so go ahead, Corey.
I was just going to say, from a development standpoint, you're creating custom content for industry, right?
Right.
For businesses, but do you see e-education customers yet coming to you and saying they want, I want this type of a
Well, we just started pushing out into the educational field. So unless the sales cycle was a matter of about 48 hours, probably no. I can tell you this, is that when we started, you know, for the first 3 years, we spent just literally doing what we're doing now. We're talking about it, you know, let people try the technology if you haven't ever put on a pair of goggles. And as of 2018, we started seeing budgets and line items for budgets that actually talked about VR. We actually, instead of us pushing the technology and saying this is something you should consider, we have people coming to us now and looking for a vendor, looking for somebody that can help implement it. And that's a fundamental shift. And I think we're going to see the same thing from an educational standpoint, from our standpoint. Now, we build custom content. If you're just not knowing what your industry is or what you do, but you know, there's over 1,000 different educational experiences in Google Expeditions alone, and there's a ton of other 360 videos on YouTube that you can actually engage without spending a dime for content. So I don't know if that answered your question, but no, we haven't had people beating down the door from an educational base yet. We have high hopes probably a year from now when it starts to sink in. How about the little gal in the back?
So for educators, do you have suppliers identified that you would direct them to that might have greater discounts or anything like that? Or the goggles, or if I were an educator in a school and I came to you and said, do you have a specific supplier that I might be able to get a discount?
Well, and that's something we can get into if you guys want to step into Paul's deck. He goes through all of that information.
Are you going to share that?
If you guys want to, I certainly can. Anybody?
So I'm curious about some of the unintended consequences or outcomes potentially. So we had some brief conversation before the presentation started about like motion sickness and things like that. Are there any concerns we have? You talked a little bit about addiction and about students possibly making that disconnect if it became too dependent on virtual reality from reality. But other than things like motion sickness, are there any other concerns?
Well, there is not any, people are concerned how young of a child can you engage? And it all has to do is how long are you engaging them? Are kids living in those goggles, or are they, is it a fairly short experience? We're just starting a project for an insurance group that effectively we're building VR games that they can give to, for instance, they might give them to St. Luke's Children's Hospital for the kids that as they're going through chemotherapy, and it's a 4 or 5 hour process that they can engage these games. But the games are designed to turn off after 10 minutes. So they're designed to give them a break, to kind of take them out of the experience, because frankly, you're right, a kid may live in these things. And that's not necessarily a good thing to do. As far as, that's the technology. As far as the content, you can have good content and bad content. There are crazy, scary games that you can get into in VR that, it'll scare you. Even though you know it's coming, it still scares you, because it's like going through a haunted house and things jump out at you, it just scares you.
I was thinking like things, and again, imagining that I have 5 or 10 of these devices and I have a class of 20 to 25. And so things like sharing head lice and any kind of skin, are they easy to clean? These are the kinds of things that I think someone, as they look at implementing this, needs to have considered.
Well, let me jump forward to show you what Paul's been doing. So this is the expedition kit, and they want $10,000 for 30 students, which is just crazy expensive. He uses these little folding VR goggles that they aren't even as, and I don't have a pair with me, but they're kind of built like this. And they just fold up and they take any phone, and they're plastic glass lenses. They're more expensive because the lenses are glass, so they have a better experience. And that's the decision that he went with. But you're right, it is a question that if you use something that goes over somebody's head, and kids, you know, kids are kids, you know. Yeah, you can see how it works here, where it's just, it fits any phone, and it's kind of like a box, and it folds flat. And what he does, he brings out a case about this big, and his whole system fits in there for 30 kids. So he's got the phones, he's got the goggles, he's got the Wi-Fi router, and that's his kit, and he literally built it. Cobbled the phones together from who knows where. So when he's teaching, he has innovator-led, and he's the innovator, so he'll get up in front of a group, and they'll go through a certain curriculum. Teacher and innovator partnership, the teacher-led, so he'll teach the teachers how to use the technology. Or sometimes they have student-led. The students get to kind of pick where they want to go, and they all go there. So it's the DODOcase Smart VR is the, and actually I think they're a little cheaper than $40 now. You need a wireless router from someplace. You need any iPhone 5 or 6. We like to use iPhone 6s as a base, but he's had luck with iPhone 5s. And you need Google Expeditions, which you can, probably half of you. So I actually downloaded this morning, I downloaded a whole Excel spreadsheet which I can pull up. There is a ton of VR, we call them experiences, they call it expeditions. There's just a ton. Now most of them are not video based. That's why they tend to work on older phones, that they're panoramics, and sometimes they have hotspots built into them, sometimes they have narration. So there's an educational component that goes along with it. So this is kind of Paul's timeline. He started out 2 years ago with 11 viewers, 24. He's got his kit now, which we saw just a couple months ago. And he's going to keep going. He believes in it. So I'll make this available to Jacob. I'll send this to you if you want to push it out, because it's a great resource for teachers. Actually, no, it's embedded in mine, isn't it? So you've got it. So let's talk a little bit about AR. Pokeman Go, has anybody played that? I noticed a little subtle head under the Jacob's going, well, I don't want to talk about it, but
Well,
yeah, that's AR. It's another form of immersive technology that's going to be big, not only in the classroom, but just about everywhere we go. So in this case, you put $1 down, and you look through your phone, and the White House pops up there in living 3D. You can move around, you can zoom in with it. It's just as if it's actually put right there on the table. And because it locks to the table, it locks right here, it feels real to you, as long as you're looking through that device. There's another form. You can have fun with sea creatures. I may mention that we use it from a marketing standpoint. So Blacksmith is a tool that you can actually start creating your own VR packages. You can create your own content. We use Unity as a programming authoring system. And Blacksmith is a derivative of Unity. It's kind of simplified, so you don't have to have a lot of coding. It's kind of drag and drop. But you can do a lot of work with it. Now, it's kind of rudimentary, but it will absolutely, you can build things with it that you can interact with, that you can use in the classroom. And more so, you can have the kids build things with it, which then they love that stuff. And that's Paul's email. So now, if there's no other questions or answers, would you like to try it?
I have one quick question before we move on with that. Is anybody in the industry working on synthesizing nerve end receptors so you can feel pain in virtual reality?
That sounds a little scary to me. Have you seen somebody about that?
I'm just thinking if we build these for industry to train with, and your goal is to do a project without getting burnt, or something like that, can we synthesize the burning sensation?
Not that I'm aware of. We have at least had some discussions with the state police on taking a Fitbit and actually using their VR training exercises and then analyzing a recruit based on biometrics, so that, let's face it, some of us are really well suited for stress situations. Corey here, he's going to be like a rock star out there. And maybe Jan, because I know and love her, Jan isn't so good at a tactical situation. But wouldn't you like to know that early on in the recruiting phase? Because recruiting costs a lot of money, especially if you know, and we know what the state police go through to get a recruit from initiation all the way through. It's an expensive process. So if you knew early on that Mark curls up in a fetal position when you put him in a stressful situation, it's better that he go do a different career path. So as far as pain and initiating pain, not that I've heard of. But biometrics, yes.
Our brain will often stimulate that sensation just from the experience, right? So like your story about turning and seeing that crossbar, it created for you that sensation effectively without necessarily having to actually input your nerve sensation.
It was a very verbal response, that's what it was. So, you're right.
You didn't just not notice that, oh, I was just impaled by that bar, or whatever the case may have been. But.
So, and if you think about maybe the other side of it, people that are afraid of heights, people that are afraid of spiders and bugs or snakes. I mean, imagine being able to put them in a safe situation that allows them to get used to those conditions virtually, so they know they're safe. But literally, I mean, when you look at, we can show you some base jumping shots here. You're looking down, and that's 400 feet down. You're right on your tippy toes. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that you can actually do and embrace. Well, every time we go out, people come up with a new idea, and it's like, well, we were sitting in the conference room one time with a gentleman with Black Box, who they're building a system of exercise machines based on virtual reality. And he said it's like the Wild Wild West and the Gold Rush all put together. It said wherever you plant your flag, there's probably going to be gold if you dig deep enough. You don't know how much gold, but there's going to be gold there because it has so many opportunities to help people. So I've always remembered that. That was about 2 or 3 years ago. Anybody else? Corey, you got to have something to say.
Ready Player One. Ready Player
Yeah. Have you got a system at home?
Just do cardboard. That's how it goes.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the nuts and bolts of it. You say, I see the camera, you say you use Unity, glasses. What's the process of taking...
So if you want to create 360 video right now, even in this room, you can go out and buy a $120 camera and put it on top of your smartphone, and you can shoot it. Is it great? Is it wonderful? No, but it'll get you in the game. You can buy a $300 camera, and the quality's a lot better. You can buy...
Now 360, so some sort of lens system that they...
Yeah. Let me get back here a ways. So we use two types of cameras, and we have used a lot of cameras over the years. So in the early years, it was a bunch of GoPros that felt like it was all duct taped together. In fact, we shot Boise State football. We had 10 GoPros in this mount, and each one was shooting 4K, and you had to stitch them all together. So it was hugely laborious as far as time and energy to create the experiences, to create running out of the tunnel. And if you guys are into football, we can have you doing a whole bunch of stuff with football here. But to create that is work that you don't have to do now. For instance, this camera is more of a production camera. It's got 6 lenses all around. It's about, by the time you get into it, it's about $4 grand to buy. Okay, it's expensive. But you can also buy cameras that are about $700 that self-stabilize. In fact, they have accelerometers, they have GPS in them, they know where they are. They're produced by Garmin. They're not quite the quality. This shoots at 8K, those shoot at 5.7K resolution. More resolution is the better, but you also have to be able to work with it. And those cameras are about $700. But you can also step down to a camera that's $300 and get a pretty good experience. The $120 you're kind of just playing. But so they'll either self-stitch in the camera, which means that they take all the footage from all the different cameras around, they put it all together for you. So what comes out is something that you can upload to Facebook or YouTube, or you could throw it into an app or a platform. If you want to go higher than that, then you can stitch it yourself because you want to have that control and tweaking. Now that takes a lot more skill and experience. But literally, if you could get a $120 camera and you could shoot this whole seminar in 360 video and throw it out to Facebook for a modest investment to get you in the game.
Okay, so you say 360, but I'm thinking, okay, how often do I look behind me? Okay, generally it's...
Well, it is. Yeah, in fact, you want to generally, you want about 160, 70 degree. This is where the important things are going on. But for the most part, people like the ability to feel connected to it. So they, from time to time, they will move around, and you do it. You'll look back at, what was your name?
Kate.
Kate?
Yeah.
You'll look back at her once in a while. It's what makes us human. It's an experience because we're in a whole world. We're not in a world that's just here. Or in the case of a normal video camera, we're not in a world that is just here. That's what makes it so powerful, is because we feel connected. We feel it's more like real life to us. When you look at this is just a passive experience. You're just watching. It could be reruns of Friends up here. And it's not going to have the same impact if you were right sitting on the couch with those 4 or 5 people that I don't know their names and only watch the show one time and understand what they're going through. And that's really the power of it. So you're right. For the most part, I'm going to frame up what's important in front of camera 1. Now in this case, camera 1's over here. I'm gonna frame up on this camera mostly what goes on in here. But everything I shoot, I capture the whole world. It's got some challenges. Right now, Cam is sitting behind the camera. He's not even in view. Jan back there is not in view either. The only people that are in view are you guys. If that was a 360 camera, we'd even catch Tom back there. We'd watch him whatever he's doing back there, we'd watch him. If we wanted to. So how do you direct the viewing audience? How do you direct them? I want to know what's important to you from your standpoint. And there's some techniques that you can do that. Number one, we can actually shift the point of view digitally. And then we can use audio. You know, spatial audio, if there's a forklift coming at me like this, and I'm in a training session, in a video that I'm just watching up here, I have no engagement to it. But in real life, I'm going to turn and go, damn. And in a VR simulation, I'm going to do that same thing. So those environmental cues. Now, Expeditions uses little arrows. Let's arrow over and I'll show you where you should be looking. But in the content that we build, we use a lot more robust environment to help people realize where they should be looking. But I don't have the luxury of running over here with a VR camera and going framing you up like that. I mean, I can move the camera over there, but that'd get kind of scary. Any other thoughts?
With augmented reality, sticking outside of the box, could you potentially set up what you're building into whatever program, have everybody put on a set of goggles, and then actually do a fire drill where there is a synthetic fire or a automated fire in the building?
Multiplayer.
Okay.
Yeah, like a game. Who likes video games? You play games? Come on, man, you're that age.
Oh, I'm older than that. I just look young.
Okay. I'll admit I play a game called World of Tanks once in a while. And you're playing with people all over the world. They drive around their little tanks, you drive around your little tank. It looks pretty real. In fact, it'll scare you a little bit because especially if you have a good graphics card and good audio. But yes, multiplayer is kind of that next big thing. So we can not only have a classroom experience the same expedition, but we can have them experience the same thing and work together. So let's take a hazmat team, and we have, I'm gonna make Corey the incident commander. And I'm gonna make the three of you guys, you're gonna be teammates, and you each have your own responsibilities, and you're gonna play out those responsibilities in an environment, and we've got an ammonia lake in an industrial plant. And you can do it over and over again until you get it right, because it costs nothing, a little bit of time, once it's built. Right now, they do it in sandboxes, you know, tabletop exercises. That's how they figure this stuff out, and they've done that for decades and decades. But now you can actually live it. And Corey can be doing the thing that an incident commander must do and get used to that role playing and those responsibilities. Likewise, you know, it may be your job to stop the leak. So Mark, you run over and do what he says, go stop it, Mark. And you go, well, damn, I don't know if I want to do that. After all, multiplayer. So these things, CGI stuff, it's built on a gaming engine. Same way with app distribution. We can distribute to iOS, Android, Rift, Vive, PC, WebGL for e-learning, LMS, and it's all built on a gaming engine. Because that's the most robust environment that we've got so far. And it works really well.
You do CGI development?
We do. Yeah. Yeah, we just hired a guy. He starts Monday, another Unity developer. Because we're always short of them. So, what do you do?
So I teach at the College of Southern Idaho, and so it's in trade industry.
We need more Unity courses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking from a training standpoint, a lot of workforce development. We do safety training on lifts and forklifts, and it's like, it'd be nice to not have to rent the movement for $200 a day.
It is, and we're, I don't have them up here, but we're working on crane safety right now. It's exactly what you're talking about. I think that you'll find that these type of things really supplement your existing training. I don't think they'll ever eliminate actually being out there on a boom, actually being, you know, driving a forklift. I mean, I can simulate driving a forklift, or I can take a VR camera and put it on a helmet, and you're going to see exactly what you would see driving that forklift. You're going to see where to put your hands, what you're doing with the levers, as if you're really there. But at a point in time, you need to go out and drive it.
Still lacks the interaction.
But what VR can do for you is it can make that process so much more efficient. It can create an environment where that, from a pre-prep standpoint, you're going to have your students go through that experience. Well, I'll give you an example. The state police teach a pit maneuver as part of their academy. You've ever seen pitting a car where you bump the hind end and the car spins out? So traditionally, they end up damaging a lot of vehicles because the guys don't do it right. They hit it too hard. They don't hit it right. That's just what they do. But for about 2 years now, we built an app for them that we actually go through them from multiple different VR cameras. We've caught that whole experience from in the car of the sergeant instructing them to sitting there saying, look right down where that point of contact so you can see the angle. And in those 2 years and going through a number of academies, they haven't damaged one car. And the reason is because people get to practice. They get to train without going out. It's like if you ever played football, would you ever go out on the football field for the first game without ever practicing? Or tennis, if you're a tennis player, would you go out without ever, you know, you just pick up a racket, you're going to go play a tennis tournament. You probably wouldn't do very well with it, but typically what they do is in the classroom, they pull up some pictures in the classroom in PowerPoint, and it's not the same as being there, especially if you can look at it from different angles. And that's what VR does. And it's been hugely successful.
First experience with no mistakes.
Or learn from your mistakes because, yeah.
Without physically making a mistake.
I'll give you another state police. No, let's not call them the state police. Let's call it an unidentified law enforcement agency. So, we were doing an active shooter situation. There was 6 separate scenarios that it was over at the state school in Nampa. It's been abandoned for a long time, or parts of it. Makes a great training ground. And unfortunately, one of the officers of this not to be named agency happened to stitch a hostage 3 times across the chest. You know, it happens in half a second. You have to make those decisions between life and death when you draw a gun, and he thought the guy had a gun and he was just holding his hands up. And so not only did the instructor obviously catch that, but now it's documented and it can be reviewed over and over and over and used for future officers, future recruits for training. And because you feel like you're in the situation, just rather than me just catching a video camera of you going ton ton ton, you know, they use simulation so it hurts. We can catch that whole experience. We can look around and try to figure out what really went wrong. You know, so there's a lot of different ways that you can use the technology.